I found that with fertility, it is quite conflicting because fertility isn't linear. It's not, if you try extra hard, it will deliver results faster. And I found that incredibly
Frustrating.
frustrating.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think it's actually counter to success. And that was a big revelation for me. In fact, it kind of started the ball rolling in terms of me just understanding my health and wellness and being more connected with myself.
Let's talk about X, baby. Let's talk about she and he. Let's talk about all the good and bad things on fertility. Let's talk about X. Let's talk about X.
Hello and welcome to the How Would You Like Your Ex podcast. I'm your host, John Chan, and also founder of Sow Fertility. In each of our episodes, we invite women who have gone through different fertility journeys to come share their experiences, and also professionals who have supported their fertility journeys. Today, we've got a very special guest all the way from Singapore, Sabine, who is here to share with us a little bit more about some of her challenging times in her fertility journey a few years ago. Now, before we go into her story, I want to tell you a little bit more about Sabine herself. I met Sabine at a Femtech conference, and she's an experienced marketing professional and a mom of two. When we sat together at one of the workshop tables, I started introducing what I do as founder of Sow Fertility. She was pretty upfront and told us, actually, I went through IVF. And I was quite surprised by her honesty and just, at the time we were strangers, just meeting each other, and just her openness and upfrontness and just unashamed and unafraid of telling me, quite a stranger, that she has gone through quite a difficult time in part of her fertility journey. So I'm very happy and grateful to be able to invite her today on this podcast episode to be able to share a little bit more about her very personal story. Sabine, welcome on board.
Hi, Dawn. Thanks so much for having me here.
Thank you so much for coming. So I want to give you a little bit of time also introducing yourself. I know that you are growing a new startup as you've sort of departed your full-time marketing life. So tell us more about you, yourself, and what you're working on.
Yeah, so I have been on quite the personal journey, and I guess to sort of zoom out and how we have connected and why I would be at a Femtech conference in the first place. So, I not so recently, maybe about a year ago, started to have this epiphany that the time that we spend and dedicate to building our legacy should be really worthwhile. And I started to feel that that purpose was drifting more and more to, at that time, the company's purpose. And it was a pretty difficult time to sort of come to terms with that. For the last 17 years, really meeting KPIs and excelling was the North Star. So it felt quite a lonely and challenging space. I had left a pretty big role at Netflix. I was leading marketing for a few markets in Southeast Asia. And, it was an incredible experience and one that I never thought I would leave. One day, after having my son, it was a good forcing function for me to sort of just really start to think what I wanted more out of life and my time and how I spent it. And then fast forward to having my daughter, and it really was more of a forcing function. And I'll talk more about sort of that challenging journey to get pregnant the second time. And then I think that led me into thinking, okay, well, if I had the choice of what I wanted to do, how do I want to spend my time? And that led me to starting up my own business a couple of months before the Femtech conference. So look forward to talking more about that as well.
Yeah. You really strike me as someone who is have so much courage, right? You have the courage to realize that, you know, what you're looking for in life wasn't really aligning with what you were doing and deciding to pivot. Obviously, that took a little bit of time. And you also have the courage to say, hey, I am experiencing some challenges in conceiving, and went and actively looked for some solutions as well. So let's jump into that. You mentioned that you have a son and then a daughter, but in your journey for your second child, it wasn't as easy as the first time. So why don't you tell us a little bit more about that journey, and what was your health situation or wellness status all the way up until trying to conceive your second child?
So I think it was completely night and day. With my son, it was a textbook journey to getting pregnant. Basically came off the pill. And a few months later, bang, you know, positive pregnancy test, amazing. The whole pregnancy was uncomplicated. And it all just felt really easy. And at the same time, I had friends who were going through quite a challenging fertility journey. And I had a lot of empathy for them, but I couldn't really understand it because it just seemed so straightforward. And then, you know, with my daughter, it was anything but. And I ended up having a miscarriage after about 6 months of trying to conceive. So not clinically that long. It felt pretty long. And then to have what they call as a missed miscarriage was pretty traumatic. And it then took about another 6 months before we sought other fertility support, and that ended up with the conception of my daughter. In terms of my health and wellness, or the status of my well-being, I think a bit of context about me is that I have a type A personality, and I applied that to many areas of my life and was successful and continue to be successful. I found that with fertility, it is quite conflicting because fertility isn't linear. It's not, if you try extra hard, it will deliver results faster. And I found that incredibly frustrating. And in fact, I think it's actually counter to success. And that was a big revelation for me. In fact, it kind of started the ball rolling in terms of me just understanding my health and wellness and being more connected with myself. So with my son, you know, I was in I don't think I ever thought there was any challenges with being pregnant, or I didn't think they applied to me per se. And then going through the miscarriage and then having to seek fertility treatments with my daughter, I just was quite angry about it and frustrated as to
where was the anger towards, do you think, now that you look back?
That's a great question. I definitely directed it at myself. You know, what was wrong with me? You know, why couldn't I just outsmart this? Is it more about tracking my cycle? Was it more about finding out the best supplements to take? You know, the right level of exercise, the right kind of nutrition, etc. And then there was also some residual anger at my husband because there's, you know, it takes two people to make a baby. So then, you know, it's got to go somewhere else and sideways. And it unfortunately landed on him. And, you know, that definitely caused, you know, a strain in terms of just our relationship, that we hadn't had that type of pressure put on us before. And of course, he wanted the same goal, right? We both did. And if anything, it should be something that unites you both together. But I definitely felt that that was something that caused us to sort of have a strain on each other.
Yeah. And when you said, you know, you mentioned what's the right tracking, right exercise, you know, the emphasis on right, it's something folks that are going through fertility challenges are, because trying to find a solution to fix it and rectify it, we tend to then go to understand, obviously, what is the right way to do it. And how did you then find your right way eventually? Or at least, what was the journey to exploring what could be helpful rather than fixating on maybe what is the objectively right thing to do?
I think I look back at that time and I actually think I should have been a lot kinder and patient with myself. Because I have this type of personality that, everything is about doing things. Like once we made the decision, it's got to happen. And then I like to plan things out. So, in 6 months' time, we'll be here. In 12 months' time, we'll be here. We have weddings to go to, but I won't be traveling at this point. So I was trying to schedule everything with this unknown outcome. And I found that was frustrating. And if I was to kind of talk to myself and sort of see myself in the past, I would just say it's going to be okay. Your body knows what it needs to do, but you've got to take care of yourself, right? You're bringing a life into this world, and there is something spiritual about that. And if it's not in the right conditions, it won't happen. And I don't think I ever really thought about it that way, or wasn't really ready to accept that. And just wanted, well, tell me what supplements I need to take. Tell me what app I need to use. Tell me, what's the right kind of fertility formula. And I will do it. But, looking into myself and, figuring out if I'm doing okay and my husband's doing okay, that really didn't occur to me.
And so how did you end up finding out or figuring this part out, right? Like, I'm sure it took a lot of, like you said, anger, disappointment, frustration, all those negative emotion, and it definitely wasn't going to be hard moving on beyond holding that type of emotion. So tell us a little bit, how you navigated and pushed beyond those very normal feelings and going to a place of realization and almost surrender, right, to things that you cannot control. So how was that looking like for you?
I started to do more manifesting and visualization, where, I try to project in the future where, what does that future look like? How does it feel like? And started to document it down. Wow. So it wasn't so much just going around in my head. And then also putting, of course, because I'm quite a pragmatic person, putting timelines on things, but more timelines like, okay, well, if it doesn't happen by this summer, and I think I fell pregnant somewhere in March, but if it wasn't going to happen by, say June, July, then I was going to release the pressure and start to plan life as if, we just had our son and that was it. And that was a huge pressure relief for me, I think, because it sort of allowed me to say, okay, well, there's going to be this period and we're going to put all our effort and focus and hopes and dreams in having and fulfilling this sort of manifested dream of how our life will be. But I still have an amazing life and family. And I was starting to then build out what that could look like with just my son. And, within, I think the next cycle is actually when I ended up falling pregnant. So I do believe that when people say just relax, it's the most infuriating thing to hear. But I think if you deconstruct just relax, what I interpret it as is connect with yourself more. Figure out what's going on with you. And for me, that visualization exercise just helped. It was a tool to help me do that. And I think it's something that is overlooked in all of the appointments with the fertility specialists and, all the research that you do online. I think it's all about the science of it. And not really the spirituality of it.
Amazing. I think what you mentioned just now also, creating a visualization of what does it mean to have and not have, right? So that you permit yourself to almost move on beyond a specific version of your life as well, right? So you're saying, hey, by this time, if this version of my life doesn't get realized, I still have an amazing part of my life that I can still pursue, and that it's okay to almost lightly let that go. And I think that is very profound and not talked about enough in terms of when people, whether they go through challenges or loss, like what does it mean to move on beyond that specific, very challenging time, right? A lot of people do get stuck in, when it comes to fertility journeys, could be 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. We've all heard people who've done IVF and multiple cycles, north of 10 cycles, and you really start to wonder, it's going to take a huge toll on your own life, but also the lives of your family. And you also, for example, have a son, right? Like, what does it mean to say, hey, maybe we put a time stop or sandbox this such that we enable ourselves to move past beyond this specific episode of life?
Yeah, look, I think that was a really sort of big milestone for me to get to, because you're right, you know, it isn't fair on, if let's say in my case it was secondary infertility, it's not fair on the other child, right? Because there's always a part of you that is wishing for something else. And for me, at least, it was very difficult to be fully present. You know, when I was going to pee on the stick and checking, you know, the results, and okay, this time it didn't work, and you know, just being really sad, but like having to put on a big smile. You know, when I went through the miscarriage, the same thing. Didn't want him, and he was only 1.5 at the time, and I didn't want him to see me so sad. So again, having to kind of put that mask on, and you know, just not wanting to continue that cycle perpetually was just something that I had to kind of put a timeline on. And I also think with secondary fertility, it's almost more frustrating, and it's interesting. So I have friends that have you know, primary infertility, I think they call it, and for them that was almost worse, because they, you know, said, oh, but you have a child, right? So you have a child already, so it's okay. And I think in my case it made it even more not okay, because then it's like, well, what's wrong? Clearly my body has been able to fall pregnant pretty easily without any like support or treatments. So what's going on now? Like, what am I doing wrong? Versus, okay, I've never been able to, you know, fall pregnant or conceive and grow a baby. But
so it seems like you're almost feeling like, how did I break the system, right? This body used to work. What did I do? Like, you almost put more blame on yourself because this was something that was functioning. Now it's not. Then it is up to you to almost go find out what broke, or how did you cause it, right? So it seems like guilt was a big part of it, towards yourself, maybe?
Definitely guilt, because we had decided to delay starting a family, and a lot of that was my decision, and that was because at the time I was working at a company that is notorious for being a high performance culture. And yes, externally there's a lot about what, you know, supportism system and, you know, the sort of cultural values, but when you're in it and you are in a high performance culture, you know, the idea of having to step away for 4, 5, 6 months longer sounds so wild and dangerous. And so I delayed that whole journey, and then I felt pretty guilty about that, because at that time I was past 35, you know, the cliff of fertility. And so a lot of like, well, you know, I was the one to put myself, like us, in this situation, and therefore I need to find a fix to this. And I definitely felt like it was on me to fix it versus a joint struggle.
And so how did you ended up seeing that through, in terms of taking a deep breath, in terms of thinking, okay, this is not a healthy mindset probably, right, for you to be able to get a successful outcome. How did you then move also beyond the strain of what this challenge has on your marriage, and into a better spot as you continue on that journey?
Yeah, so I started seeing a therapist after the miscarriage, and that was also quite an unusual thing for me, because I am sort of the belief that you can just, you know, keep on carrying on.
You can will yourself out of it.
Right, yeah, things just get better, right? If you just stop thinking about it and keep yourself busy. I think it's quite a Chinese mentality.
Yeah.
And it had always worked in the past. And I just found myself getting quite stuck on negative emotions. And I thought, okay, well, this is not good. I need help. I don't want to be this negative, toxic person in my personal and professional life. So I sought help, and I started seeing a therapist once a week, and that was really, I think my biggest takeout was it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay not to be okay around people. And I started to just open up and be a bit more vulnerable and talk about my feelings and my struggle more, and share my problems with friends, with my husband and family. And that was just incredible in terms of the burden that lifted off of me. And particularly with one friend I was incredibly close to, and she was going through a similar struggle with her fertility journey. And she was also a corporate working mom as well. And so we had a lot of, similarities in that way we could share sort of our struggles. It's interesting, you talked about in the opening of the podcast how I came across as very candid and brave, because I definitely wasn't whilst going through this journey. And I felt like it was always something that was the elephant in the room, whether it was in a boardroom or whether it was at home. It was always something that was there, that was staring at me, but no one else could see.
Yeah.
And I look back at that time, and with my daughter, when I was pregnant with her, I had joined a fintech startup, and I was the CMO there. So the buck stopped with me in many ways, and I was there, trying to create a culture of candor. And yet here I was not being fully candid with my teams. And that's something that I look back at and wish I had the bravery to do differently.
But that must have been a very lonely part of your life. The way you described it, even, I mean, you said, it was like the elephant in the room that no one could see except you, right? That must have been a very lonely feeling.
Yeah, it was. And, I also feel like I wasn't showing up as the leader I want to be, because, I'm not, if you look at the statistics, there must have been at least 4 other people in that room that had a similar story. And hearing someone in senior leadership being more open about their fertility journey, or just even talking about pregnancy and that whole kind of journey, would have been, I think, a lot more empowering than me sort of almost trying to pretend I wasn't pregnant, and not going through all of these issues.
Yeah.
Right. I was traveling during COVID, and being in quarantine, as well as being sort of in my early pregnancy, having to get doctors to come to my quarantine room in Jakarta and check on me. And I look back and I think, wow, I struggled so much to get pregnant. And even when I was pregnant, I really didn't give myself the love and kindness that I should have.
You weren't present really in that pregnancy process, very much going after the next thing. It's almost like you said, hey, I finally got a successful outcome. Now keep at it. Let me get on to the next thing, right?
Yes.
Now, I think you brought up a very interesting, next topic, which is how do we discuss fertility at work, right? How should we create a culture potentially that has the openness and acceptance for, your team members, or that they truly and provide the support and space for team members who are going through these types of challenges. And clearly, from anecdotally, we know that impacts their work performance, their mental health, and from statistically, we also know that, because like the 2024 Deloitte survey, in saying that 20% of women who are going through infertility challenges at work thinks about leaving work. So tell me, with now your experience and having been in senior positions, what do you think about how that should be approached at work?
I mean, that's a great question, and one I tried to solve. So, whilst I was at Netflix as part of the Women's ERG, which is for advocating equality in the workplace, where we were able to really focus on helping empower women through workshops and through kind of forums and discussions on topics like this, and how to approach it, how to navigate that a whole discussion with your manager, talking about, you know, the infertility and fertility journey, as well as, you know, announcing your pregnancy, etc. So on the outside, you know, I think theoretically I had a lot of knowledge about how to do that. But again, there was something that then didn't translate to action. And, you know, I look back at my time at Netflix, I had a wonderful manager, and we are still friends today. I saw him last week in London, and there was no reason for me to hide it. But I felt deeply uncomfortable about bringing up the whole topic of pregnancy, and felt that, you know, I was putting myself down a notch, right? You know, if people were putting me in a consideration set for a promotion, that would mean that, you know, this is a stain on my profile. Yet no one, that was just my interpretation. No one had said that to me. And, you know, I think I sort of try to resolve that by investing more of my time in the women's ERG, to sort of make it better for other women going through that. And I do think that ERG resources are incredibly powerful, because it's a neutral within your workplace, a neutral a group and community for you to seek help and advice, to help kind of skill build, that isn't as direct as having to kind of go to your HRBP or your manager specifically around it. And I'd say that, you know, my time at the startup definitely wasn't as mature in terms of having a concrete culture that had, you know, policies and processes around maternity leave, around even kind of how, less alone how to talk to your boss or about this. And I do think that having that as a priority is super important. Like, to your point, around 20% of women who do consider leaving their company because of, you know, anxiety around, you know, getting pregnant and what that would mean. That's a crazy statistic for us to still consider in, you know, 2024. It should be something that we talk openly about, and whether or not it's a male dominated workforce, you know, they likely have wives and homes, and they are likely also parents and have experienced this from a personal standpoint, and there's no reason that that cannot be discussed in a professional forum. And I think the more that people are open and honest about this, and not open to the extreme of it being virtue signaling, which I've seen a lot of as well, and I really dislike, but coming from a genuine intent of wanting to share their story to help make it less scary and safe for other women to stand up and talk about their experiences and, you know, share their struggles, is really kind of how we're going to affect change.
And I'm curious, when you shared your story about your fear in sort of sharing your pregnancy journey with your manager, and you mentioned specifically, you know, no one told you that's going to be negative specifically, but you still felt that way. I want to unpack that a little bit more. Did you get that impression mainly from because role models, a lack of role models, or because you've seen other women suffer in promotional committees when they've had, you know, taken time out for their pregnancies and whatnot? What has impacted your subconscious mind in a way that had contributed to that sense of reservedness, really?
Yeah, definitely those two, in terms of, you know, an absence of role models, of senior women with children. If I think back, the core leadership at the time I was there, of the women that I can think of, they either didn't have children or they also had chosen to delay their family planning till much later. And then also experiencing colleagues who had returned to work and 6 months to 1 year later then left. I think that just starts to plant a seed of, well, is that what happens? And they were on a really positive trajectory, and there's obviously always two sides of it, right? But ultimately companies will exit underperforming or underutilized resources. And to me, that was quite a clear signal that going off and having a family was not a career maker.
And I mean, in a world where we make the women feel that way, honestly, the men also equally, right? They cannot afford to take much paternity leave. They're seen, if not even more so as probably career killer if you as a man going to take that much time out or more time than what is socially acceptable out to care for your family, to care for your kids and whatnot, and in a situation where the couple is going through infertility issues, right? Their wives are. It doesn't mean that the men don't feel anything, but it does mean that they also don't have as much support to process their grief, process the equal challenges that they have, process the strain in their marriage, and then also equal disappointment they feel in not being able to have a child that they thought it would have been easier, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is a mental health crisis, particularly amongst men, because of the points that you mentioned, right? Reaching out and having that support system and that community, it is more prevalent amongst women than it is amongst men.
Yeah.
And this journey can be incredibly isolating, and not feeling that you have the right community or support system in place just compounds that. The reality is there are other men out there going through a similar journey, but you have to talk about it to even know. No one's walking around with a stamp on their head going, struggling with fertility, right? It's not like something you bring up in a bar when you're watching a football game. So I do think that there needs to be more attention, just trying to help more men and know that there are resources in place for them to seek help, so that they're not having to carry this burden just on their own. I do look back at that time and think that I could have been more proactive in helping my husband seek, support, or, encouraging him to reach out to friends. But I think I was so much within my own head and my own kind of problems and trying to fix that and troubleshoot it, that it never actually occurred to me.
Yeah. We, as part of Sow Fertility, we do offer free discovery calls for people who are going through infertility challenges, or, just have questions about the fertility journey in general. And we've actually recently got more calls from men, actually, specifically. It's actually quite interesting, and it's quite, I think, I don't know what's the right word, heartening maybe, to feel like, hey, like the men are now increasingly trying to reach out. They may be asking questions on behalf of the wives. They may be asking questions of how they can better support the wives, because they're going through things together, but they are not the ones sort of taking that injection. They're not the ones who are suffering a miscarriage physically, but they are going through it emotionally as well. And there just doesn't seem to be enough resources out there openly for men to teach them and help them figure out how do they process their own emotions while being a support for their other halves, right? So I think that's you're completely right. I think there's so much more we can do also for the men on the topic of fertility when it comes to going through these challenges. It's really two people, not just one.
Yeah, that's wonderful that you have that resource available for men.
Yeah.
And it's really encouraging to see that there's a take-up rate on that. I think the fact that it is also anonymous would really kind of help with that initial barrier of seeking help, so that they don't feel like there's that stigma of, aren't your like swimmers strong, or, all of that kind of just banter that goes around it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Sabine. And we have covered so many things during this podcast episode. And thank you so much again for being so candid and vulnerable and talking about some of the pretty dark and isolated moments of your life. And I'm so happy to hear that you have now, on the other side, really not just on the fertility journey side, but also that you've decided on your career path-wise have taken a different turn. So before we wrap up, I just want to give you, a chance to maybe if you want to tell us a little bit more about what you're working on for the audience to know more.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dawn. Like you mentioned, I have had quite the pivot. I have started my own business. It's called Go Mode. And the mission is to close the gap between intent and action through healthy habit formation. We're building a tool that can ingest all of your wearable and tracking data and give you very easy to understand and follow actionable steps. I'm really so happy to have found this new path, and it feels a lot more purpose driven, and I'm excited for the future.
I'm excited for Go Mode and yourself as well. And for those who are watching, thank you so much for joining us today. And if you are interested in our conversations about fertility, do remember to like our episode and subscribe to our channel. See you next time. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for tuning in today. Subscribe to our channel wherever you are so you will never miss our episodes when they drop. Be sure to share our podcast with your friends so that we can break the taboo on fertility together. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels to stay up to date on the latest moves of Sow Fertility and get tips in navigating your fertility journey. I am Dawn Chan, and we will see you next time at How Would You Like Your Ex podcast.